it's sadly not going to be as interactive as I'd like it today, because I want to finish before 6 o'clock. If we make this kind of totally interactive, we'll be talking for hours and hours and hours. This is very much kind of knowledge of Marxism and how to apply it to a particular text. So I'll be referring to, you don't need to make notes or anything. This is all recorded. It's really weird. And I will be putting it on YouTube. Yeah, I'll be putting it on YouTube, so you can go back to it if you need to. You can shout out if you want, you know, if there's anything you desperately want to know. But there's actually quite a lot to get through. I'll be referring to that at different times, and I will be referring to bits of the Ragged Trail, the philanthropist, and I will be referring possibly to A Bug's Life if we don't run out of time. So we'll start off now. Microphone's muted unless you've got like a desperate question, because I can sometimes mischat things. Obviously, no inappropriate language or visuals. The only person who can use no, I can't use inappropriate language because it's being recorded. Webcams need to be off because too many teachers have got really, really bad internet. I got brilliant internet, but too many teachers live right out in the sticks and they've got like a hamster running their internet. So that's why the webcams need to be off. What we're going to do is we're going to focus a little bit on Marxism, talk through Marxism, how it's related in the critical anthology, and then link it to a text. So hopefully you just have a little bit more of an understanding of what Marxism is and how you can relate it to a text. That's the main thing. So there he is, Karl Marx. Absolute manly beard, like most people in the Victorian times. And the bit that I think we perhaps need to focus on is that bit in red. I don't know, can someone say yes? Can you see that little cursor wiggling around on the red bit? Yes, you can. Good. That's good. You can see the cursor, and that's fine because I will be doing that when we at different points in the presentation. I spent most of the year 10 kind of like pointing to the screen going, look at that bit, without thinking that they haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. I think the focus, what we just need to understand about Marx is that Marx was really focused on the idea of the inequality within society. The fact that society is built around the economy, okay, and the economy is kind of all-encompassing. So the economy is key to everything, and there are certain people at the top of the economy who are very, very wealthy, who want to stay very, very wealthy, and to do that, what they need is lots and lots of people working for them. Now, obviously, those people underneath you, those people who are working for you, you need to keep them in check and need to make sure that they're carrying on working for you. And what Marx felt was this kind of disparity that existed within society meant that ultimately the people at the bottom would rise against the people at the top, and this would culminate in communism. And this is the theory that he propounded in the Communist Manifesto that he wrote with Engels. It is actually a really interesting read. I would recommend it. But in the video, the Marxism in a nutshell, I just thought I'd explain this because I think this is a really, really good image, a pictorial image of what Marxism really is. And I don't know if any of you have seen this in sociology, psychology, or philosophy or ethics. You may have seen this picture. It's kind of like the pyramid of the capitalism system. So at the top, you have money. Money is the root of everything, and the money is owned, or the bulk of the money is owned by royalty. Royalty, the presidents, the people at the very, very top. You remember this is a 19th century theory, so it would be mostly the monarchy, but it's owned by royalty, so the ruling classes. Now, the thing is, the ruling classes have got to make sure that they control everybody below them, and they control them by the superstructure. So these guys are known as the superstructure. So we have religion, we have law. This is another religious guy, but superstructure, kind of modern day context, well, even in those days, would have been education as well. So I am a part of the superstructure. I am there to keep everybody subjugated and to be working towards, or working for, the wealth of the people at the top. Now, if these people here, if religion, if the legal system, if the educational system cannot subjugate the masses, the ruling classes have at their disposal the army. Okay, the army or the police, and these are they kind of form the group that if revolution takes place, they can subjugate through violent means. Okay, so if these guys fail, these guys won't. Down here, what we have is we have the bourgeoisie. Those are the people who own all of the factories. They are kind of the wealthy. They're not as wealthy as these people at all. These people are born into positions of power. These people have created power, or created wealth, sorry, through owning factories and through exploiting these people down here. Now, right at the very bottom, we have the proletariat, and the reason why this image is so important and so interesting is that the proletariat are supporting everyone above them. Okay, so what that's suggesting is that the proles, or the proletariat, everything depends upon them holding up everything else. If the proletariat stop, the whole system breaks down. So the issue is that the proletariat, and we can see some of them there, are quite revolutionary and kind of shouting towards the guys at the top. Whereas some of the proletariat are just happy to carry on supporting them. What the ruling classes need to do is they need to keep the proletariat in a kind of a form of subservience, to kind of trick them that actually what they're doing is necessary for the good of the country, when in reality all it is for the good of are the ruling classes and the bourgeoisie. Because if the ruling classes don't do that, then the proletariat are likely to revolt. They're going to have a revolution, and that's not what these guys want. Now, of course, what Marx realized was that if we considered the country as a whole, the proletariat right at the bottom here make up probably 95% of the entire population. The ruling classes are very, very small. They probably make up a tiny proportion, but the proles make up the huge proportion. And it's very, very easy then, with all of these people, to take control of the country. It's very, very easy for them to have a revolution. All they need to do is become aware that they are being controlled. They need to become aware that they're being subjugated. They need to be aware that they are being fooled. However, these guys here, they try to keep them in a state called false class consciousness. It is that state where they don't realize that they are being controlled. They think that what they're doing is for the good of themselves, not for the good of these people at the top. Whereas in reality, all they're doing is making the rich people rich. And that's why this image is really so important, because it really shows us that it is millions of people propping up just a few. Okay, and if those people become aware of their situation, then they could easily take over. And that's what Marx, the theory that Marx propounded, that's what ultimately would happen. And of course, all of these people would take over. So what it means is that all of the wealth that these people down here are creating by making things can be shared equally amongst everybody. Now, there are quite some major flaws within that theory. It is just a theory, obviously. So if I was to start my own factory and I employed all of you. Okay, so you are making a machine. You make one machine a week between all 18 of you. You make one machine a week. I sell it for £1 million, but I only pay you £8.50 an hour. Okay, that means that probably I'm only paying £3,500 in wages for the week's work, but I am getting over nearly £1 million in profit. Well, you're going to think that's very unfair, but I'm gaining all of my wages from all of the money that I'm earning and living in luxury when you're basically living on the breadline. And you're quite right to think it's unfair. You might want to think that actually I'm the one who's, I've put all the money forward to set up this company. I've come up with the idea so that I deserve more money. But you might be sat there thinking, well, you don't deserve that much. You should get a little bit extra, but not that much. So in the case of a revolution, what would happen is that you would depose me, chuck me out through violent means, and then you would carry on building that machine, selling it for £1 million, and then splitting the money between you. Well, that kind of won't work. Because somebody, I don't know who it would be, but somebody within the group would say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll take charge. Once that person has taken charge, then that sense of equality is stopped. That person is now in charge. And that person who might be saying, right, I'll tell you what, I'll take charge. That means that I don't actually have to do the bulk of the work. I can just tell people what to do. So that person effectively takes my role. They're getting paid the same as everybody else, but they're not actually doing anything. You could also have the person who's sat at the back saying, well, it doesn't matter, I don't have to work, I'm getting paid anyway, and not producing as much as everyone else. So there can be those fractures within society. Some people work harder than others, some people have more brains than others. And that's kind of how society works. Marx's theory, in the sense of communism, on paper, it's probably the most ideal theory there could be, but it is very ideological. It cannot work. Well, Marx is so Charlie, can you, what was that you just said? Boom, I've got to bring it up. Surely Marx is saying, I can't see it, where is it? Hold on, I've got to scroll all the way down. Surely Marx is saying that humans won't do that. It's just like capitalism that makes people see others greedy as human nature. Yeah, Marx is, well, what, are you trying to say that what Marx is saying, that people won't become greedy? I think probably you're quite right. That's what Marx believed, but we've got to consider that, well, will people become more greedy? If we look at books like Animal Farm, what we see is a critique of the communism system, where communism was shown to fail. It was kind of destined to fail because of innate human greed. So the question is why did Marx propound this theory? And obviously that is due to the kind of the burgeoning industrial revolution. There were lots and lots of people working in factories and lots of people being exploited. Is it still relevant? Yeah, it's very relevant today still. I know that in the anthology it says, you know, this is with the bringing down of the Berlin Wall, Marxism itself has, in a sense, disappeared from our political spectrum, and I think there's truth to that. But we do still see lots of people being exploited within their work. If we think about what's happening with Boohoo and Pretty Little Things, all those clothing manufacturers, and how they're treating their workers in Leicester, so people working for £3.50 an hour, what you're seeing is employers acting illegally and exploiting their workforce. And many companies do exploit their workforces. When I worked for Siemens, for example, because what you have to remember is that when you are at work, you're being paid for your time. Okay, so you're being paid for your time. When I worked for Siemens, sometimes they wanted people to work extra hours. So you work those extra hours and they pay you for that time. So if we go back 20, 30 years ago, I would get paid a time and a third for every hour that I worked. If I worked unsociable hours, I may get double time. So if I worked a bank holiday, I would probably get double time. So I get twice as much for every hour that I worked. Well, at some point in, when was it, about 2004, they decided that that was too expensive. So they cut overtime hours. But what they did was they introduced this thing called a banked hours scheme. So every hour that I worked, okay, was put in a, they called it a bank. And it meant that at some point, I could take extra leave. And for some people, me included, that wasn't why we worked the extra hours. We worked the extra hours to get the money, while Siemens were now turning around saying, do you know what, we'll give you extra leave when we will allow it. Okay, not when we wanted it, but when the company would allow it. So you actually become slightly more servile to the company. Now, I wouldn't have minded this. I would have lived with this. I would have been happy with this if it wasn't for the fact that Siemens were posting 4 billion euros profit every quarter. So they were profiting 16 billion euros at the time. It may have come down since. 16 billion euros every year was pure profit, and they introduced this scheme to try and save, I think it was around about half a million euros. So whilst they were presenting a profit of 16 billion, they were trying to save €500,000 euros based upon overtime. And I just felt that was immensely unfair. It's immensely greedy. You might disagree with me, but I was not happy with it, and that's one of the reasons why I left. And one of the reasons why I left and became a teacher was because people were compliantly happy to accept what they were told to do, and I was not happy with that at all, so I left. Right, what I'm gonna really quickly run through the sections that are in the critical anthology. And what I've tried to do is to make them more concise, just to make it a little bit more understandable. So the politics of class, which was the first section, and this is really, this is just telling us that Marx argues, and we have to get used to using the language. So when we're talking about the economy, we're talking about the base. When we're talking about education, law, religion, and the arts, we're talking about the superstructure. So Marx argues that the economy determines superstructure. What that means is that everything that we do is dictated by the economy. So the superstructure, education, law, religion, and the arts, what they are there to do is to support the economy in terms of making sure that people carry on working towards the economy. And again, education. I'm a teacher. My role is to teach people, and you will have heard people in education talk about the fact that every student costs the country £100,000 over their schooling to educate them. Therefore, the country needs to recoup that £100,000. So the idea is that we train you, you go and get jobs, and that you become a part of the economy, you contribute to that economy. Now, what we've got to remember is that Marx was propounding his ideas in the 19th century and really focusing on the exploitation of production, because what we have to remember, I don't want to talk too much about economics, but the economies run based upon things being made. That's kind of like economics 101. But if a country makes something and sells it to another country, then there is more money coming into the country from those other countries. Therefore, that original country gets richer. What capitalism does is it exploits the worker. This is what Marx said. The factory owners got rich by making sure that the workers produced a lot and paid them as little as they possibly could without literally starving themselves to death. And what they do is they they alienate them from the idea that the worker believes that they are just, that's all they are, is a worker. As workers, we believe ourselves to be free, because I mean, I can go and teach somewhere else. I'm a member of a union. I can demand a fairer wage. But what capitalism does is it reifies the worker. What the worker becomes is an object of production rather than a free human being. How does that work? Well, regardless of how the worker acts or what the worker does, they are always a part of the economy. So the economy is inescapable, and it's something that we just cannot get away from. Regardless of what you do within your life, wherever you are working in the world, unless you have a patch of land somewhere and you live off your own produce, you will be paying into a system. You will be paying taxes. You will be taking part in a larger society, and that's absolutely inescapable. Now, the reason I've put religion as the opium of the people links to this idea of the superstructure. I put it there as a last minute. This is something that Marx said. He said religion is the opium of the people. What that means is religion is like a drug for people. People soak up religion. They use it because, as you know from your Blake teaching, religion is used as a form of control, but people see it as a means of living well, as opposed to the kind of the government at the top, the ruling classes, who are using it as a form of control. So the people think that they are doing the right thing by being religious, by praying to God, because it'll make a better life for themselves, whereas the people at the top are using religion to control those people. So there is this kind of disparity between what the proletariat believe religion is and what the ruling classes believe religion is. Now, this is obviously changed today. There are a few people who have that sense of that depth of belief of the religion. So there are other things, and this is what the Marxist critic would argue. There are other things that we focus on to take our mind away from the fact that we are being controlled. The one that I always talk about is X Factor, or what was the other one? Britain's Got Talent, and things like that. Think about the millions and millions and millions of people who watch it, and you know, they're free to watch it. It's kind of mindless entertainment. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you notice, read a newspaper after something like the Daily Star or the Sun or the Mirror after the X Factor final, and that's what will be on front of the newspaper. There will be lots of focus on the winner and how unfair it was that this person didn't win, who Simon Cowell is sleeping with, why this judge isn't a relevant judge, and why this person should have won. And people talk about it. They go to work and they sit and they talk about it, like WhatsApping on family group chats, going, "Oh no, this person should have won," so on and so on and so on. But look at those newspapers; they're full of it. Okay, gossip columns are absolutely full of focus on this kind of media that's being given to us, that's being fed to us. And what the Marxist critic would argue is that actually within the newspaper, really what you should be focused on is how you are being subjugated from above, and you're being subjugated from above by ignoring the real issues. You're being fed all of this media and you're living through this media, but at the same time as someone's won the X Factor, I don't know, maybe the government have imposed a new load of taxes. Well, what are people talking about? They're talking about the X Factor. They're not talking about the taxes. So what the media becomes is a distraction. It stops us from seeing what's really wrong and what's really corrupt within society. And that links to this whole idea of religion as the opium of the people. The fact that people used religion, people adhered to religion, and it stopped them from seeing what was corrupt within a society. Marxist literary criticism, the overview. There was this I read this quotation from somebody, for the life of me, I can't remember who it was. They said, good art always has a degree of freedom from prevailing economic circumstances. That what the artist, and by the artist, what it means is the writer, what the writer can do is kind of like transcend economic circumstances to emancipate the people, to show people that they are being subjugated. And the question is that true? And sadly, it's not, because obviously writers write for money, and there is a huge economy built around writers. So whilst a writer might say, I am a free writer and I am trying to emancipate people, to free people, unless they are writing for free, unless they are giving their work away for free, then they are just a part of that system economy. Now, this next bit, the Marx literary criticism, and this is kind of, in a sense, there is a slight stereotype in here. What they maintain is that a writer's work is bound by their social class and their prevailing contemporary historical context. What that means is a Marxist critic will tend to, and it links to this idea of generalization at the bottom here. There is a tendency to generalize. What the Marxist critic will tend to do is to make generalizations. So we'll look at Victorian literature and say, well, Victorian literature is based around the exploitation of people. It might be based around colonization, because we're a great colonial power. If we're talking about literature that's written around 1910, what was known as the Belle Epoque, the beautiful era. Some literary critics will say, well, that was a time of peace and stability. Some people will say, well, it was still a time of exploitation. Literature, dystopian literature that was written post-Second World War, people will talk about the nuclear powers. There is this tendency to generalize the contexts, and this tendency to suggest that you cannot separate the work from the social class of the writer. So if you've got a working class writer, then there will be working class themes throughout their literature, throughout their work. If you have an upper class writer, then that upper class writer will tend to, just because of their social class, marginalize the working classes, and that's something to look for. There is this focus on the forms of the novels as well, and I think the form of the novel is important, because Victorian literature is they're very much realist novels. You know, they focus on people, they focus on real events, real people. Whereas in the 20th century, there was a reaction against that realism. A writer in, say, the 1920s, Virginia Woolf was one. She wrote modernist novels, James Joyce as well. Their argument was that the realist novels couldn't really convey human emotions. If you want to write about a character and a character's thought process, then you can't maybe consider that character you can't present that character's thought process in terms of normal grammatical forms, because we don't think with full stops and speech marks and commas and things like this. So Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, they used to write these things called streams of consciousness, which was trying to show the thought process of the character or the particular narrator. It made the reading very, very difficult, and there are certainly some Joyce novels which are almost impossible to read. Some critics have suggested that these writers, so the writers, the modernist writers, the absurdist writers, dystopian writers, and magic realism writers, were trying to transcend the idea of social class, but the critic argues that those divisions, they pervade in all forms of literature. So whether you are reading a Shakespeare play or whether you're reading Harry Potter, there will be some form of social class element within that literature. So what do the Marxist critics do? Marxist critics examine covert content of a literary work. In the critical anthology, it tells us about King Lear, about how in King Lear, the conflicts in King Lear might be really be about the conflicts of class interest between the rising class and the falling class. Romeo and Juliet. I know one or two of you studied Romeo and Juliet, and a covert Marxist reading talks about how Juliet's rebellion against her father is really symbolic of how the working classes rebelled against the ruling classes. Therefore, what Juliet represents is the threat of the proletariat. If we focused a lot on Macbeth, obviously, for GCSE, and a covert reading of Macbeth really is just focusing on the fact that what Shakespeare is doing is legitimizing sovereign power. I know that at GCSE we spent an awful lot of time saying things about, he's talking about the dangers of people taking power. He's talking about the dangers of these strong female characters, the dangers of belief in witchcraft. But ultimately, the Marxist critic would be focusing on the idea that it doesn't matter who's in power. What Shakespeare is doing is legitimizing the fact that somebody is in power, that there will be somebody right at the very top who is there, usually because they are born there. So he's legitimizing sovereign power. We make the socio-economic assumptions about the author. Well, we talked about that just. Consider the work in relation to its time of production in terms of its genre and audience. So what the writer is doing is they are writing this to try and present a certain idea to their audience. So if we go back to an Inspector Calls, so in Inspector Calls, we know that an Inspector Calls was first produced in 1946. Who went to see an Inspector Calls in 1946? Well, the wealthy. Only the wealthy could afford to go to the theatre in 1946. The likes of me, or maybe you, maybe some of you are wealthy enough to go, I don't know, but the likes of me and many of us, we wouldn't. There was going to London and going to the theatre was completely out of the question because we couldn't afford to do it. So Priestley wrote this play because he wanted to present his message to the people who needed to hear it, the wealthy. And finally, that how forms have been politicized. So what does it tell us? Oh yeah, it talks about how this really focuses on poetry, to be honest, but how certain forms are used because they are seen as the kind of the iambic pentameter. It's seen as kind of like a lofty form, and where perhaps more contemporary authors, modern authors, might use that ironically. I think it more relates to poetry rather than the novel. Right, there are a couple of important divisions. Remember, I mean, if you're doing philosophy, so whatever subject you do in Marxism, you will understand far more about it than you need to for English. Marx said that he wasn't a Marxist. This is very, very arguable. The argument suggests that he did not necessarily believe that communism was the right path. He just felt it was the ultimate outcome. Arguable. The one that's really important is the difference between the Marxist and the Marxist critic. And the reason why I'm telling you this is obviously a Marxist wants Marxist theory to happen, whereas a Marxist critic analyzes a text from the perspective of Marxist teaching. I'm telling you this because a couple of years ago, every Marxist essay said the Marxist believes, and it's not Marxism. You're not writing about what the Marxist believes, you're writing about what the Marxist critic finds. There is a massive difference between the two. Right, so if you are going to write a Marxist reading of a text, what are you going to be looking for? I think you're going to be looking at how the proletariat is subjugated. So how people are kept within their place. You're looking for characters who transcend social class boundaries. So if we look at novels like Great Expectations, the fact that Pip transcends social class boundaries. well, he only transcends it because someone gives him the money, but he's actually corrupted by that move into the kind of moneyed classes, and he recognizes that corruption. Okay, and that's kind of key to Great Expectations. Jane Eyre is all about a governess who desires, she falls in love with someone, she desires to transcend social classes, and it talks about the struggle, the inability to be able to do that within Victorian society. You might be looking about characters who manipulate capitalism for their own benefit. So thinking about, or if I think about Train Spotting, so the character Renton manipulates capitalism. There's this brilliant little bit within the book where he spends so much time traveling around the country because he has multiple identities, signing on at different parts in the country so he can actually gain money from the welfare system without having to do any work. He ends up saying it's really hard work. I might as well have a full-time job, because cheating the system, I'm working harder than if I was actually working. Oh, we'll go back to this first one, how the proletariat are subjugated. We're going to link this to the Ragged Trouser Philanthropist in a minute. But in 1984, the book 1984, there was a section where Winston Smith, the protagonist, goes into a proletariat pub and listens to people talking about the lottery system. And they've built this whole economy about how to try and cheat the lottery system, how to build syndicates to try and maximize their chances of winning the lottery system, because it is the lottery that they live for. It's that desire to become wealthy without having to work for it that keeps some of these people going. But it's Winston, it's only the members of the kind of like the bourgeoisie of the learned classes who know that the lottery is a sham, it's a fake. It's used to control these people, it's used to keep them in control. So that's one way how the proletariat might be subjugated. Right, so The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist by Robert Tressel. And what I want to do is to perhaps show you how to begin to approach a text, but also how only we're going to look at literally 4 pages and about 6 paragraphs, but how actually within those 6 paragraphs there is so much that you can understand. Tressel, he was Irish, so okay, thinking about the author, he's an Irish author. Is there any element that links to kind of hatred for the British? Well, maybe not hatred, but that idea of being a subservient race. He was a painter and decorator, and the book is about painting and decorating. So decorating. So is he talking? Is he writing from experience? I knew this happened, but I don't know why he was. I know that he stole some stuff. I don't know why he stole it. I know that he was very, very politically conscious, even as a 16-year-old. Was that politically motivated? I don't know. Was it because of his poverty? Again, I don't know. I do know that he moved to South Africa. I do know that when they were both very young, he divorced from his wife because she had an affair, and the theory is that she prostituted herself. Well, why did she prostitute herself? Again, I'm not entirely sure. Was it because they were so poor? Yet he had a very, very varied career. Once he was divorced from his wife, he was given charge of their daughter, and as a painter and decorator, he was very, very prosperous in South Africa. His daughter went to a very expensive boarding school. However, they moved back to the UK, and it led to a much lower standard of living. And he was very concerned with the fact that he was being forced to work very, very hard and produce substandard work. He became ill in his later life. So when this novel was, he died in 1910. And his name was Noonan. He wrote under the pseudonym Tressel because he knew that this was a very socialist novel. It was rejected by 3 publishers, and he almost burnt it because he felt that it had no value. But he used a pseudonym because he knew he didn't want it to be associated with him, because the messages that it was putting forward were far different to the messages that were being kind of propounded within society. You know, this was like 1910. Think about Mr. Berlin, about capitalist materialist society was celebrated, whereas he was focusing on the exploitation. And the book was published posthumously. It was massively heavily revised to remove the socialist content, otherwise it wouldn't have been published, but it was released in its original form in the 1950s. So just finding out a little bit about the author might give us, we might be able to link some of our ideas to the author as we're talking through it. I'll go through this massively quickly though. This is the first couple of paragraphs, and I think it's really very, very interesting when we look at this. The men are building, they're not building, what they're doing is they are updating an old-fashioned 3-storied building, standing in an acre of ground. So what this is a house that signifies wealth. It's a very, very affluent house, but it needs renovation. It's kind of representative potentially, and again, lots of these points, if we had the time, we'd be discussing, but does this house represent kind of the bourgeoisie? Does it present capitalist society? The house was affluent, but it needs renovation. Is this Trestle talking about perhaps the failings within capitalism? Is he talking about the fact that some people achieve wealth, but then lose it? So there needs to be this constant reworking of capitalism for it to be kept. For it to be successful. We can see, however, that to achieve it, you need to walk through this driveway of hawthorns and blackberry bushes, kind of metaphorically, and metaphorically suggesting that the journey to wealth is very, very difficult. What we have, so what we have is this, you know, the covert interpretation is saying, is this suggesting kind of the fact that capitalism can fail? Is it suggesting that maybe wealth always exists and that the working classes are kept in servility, kept servile to keep the ruling classes of bourgeoisie in a state that they should be kept in? What we do, however, see is once we get to the proletariat, we see how divided the proletariat are. We have carpenters, plumbers, plasterers, bricklayers, painters, besides several unskilled labourers. So already there is this division within society. We have the skilled people and we have the unskilled people. What these men are doing is that they are renovating this house. And in a sense, it's almost like a facade. Okay, they're taking away the rotten stuff and just painting over it. So almost creating a facade of capitalism in itself. But obviously these men, as they are working, and they're working very, very hard, hammering and sawing, wringing of trowels, etc., etc., they're being exposed to heavily laden air with dust and disease, germs, powdered mortar and lime. So they're being exposed to danger, they're being exposed to disease. And notice that this is right near the end of this paragraph. It seems that the work is far more important than the men themselves. Okay, so it's almost the condition, their working conditions are almost an afterthought. However, it says right at the end of the paragraph, they had plenty of work, and the plenty and work capitalized, suggesting either the importance, or maybe this is a quote from somebody of importance, that suggests that life should be good for these men because they are working very, very hard. They're working very, very hard, and they should be getting paid for it. Yet, what we see here when the foreman blew a blast upon the whistle is this sense of poverty. Even though these guys are skilled workers, even though they are working very, very hard, they drink their tea out of jam jars, dilapidated teacups, one or two empty condensed milk tins. So there is this kind of a lack of pay. They're living on kind of like subservient pay, very, very low pay, pay where they cannot afford simple things like cups, and that's why they're drinking out of kind of almost waste materials. And it's quite interesting that we have Bert, who's the apprentice, and his job is to make the tea, and they say the lad was generally considered to be making a fortune, and it's quite interesting because what that suggests is within their system of employment they've actually got their own capitalist society, and in a way, because they're paying this boy to make the tea, and there is this sense of resentment. In a sense, we'll look at this in a few seconds, because he was generally considered to be making a fortune. So for the fact that he's that each man is paying 3p, threepence, it seems, you know, they are in a sense they're quite, they think they're paying too much to him, because they believe that he's making a fortune. However, when we look at the description of the boy, you know, weedy, pale face, 15 years, only 4'9". This whole section here tells us about the poverty into which he's living. So obviously he isn't making a fortune from the amount of money that they are paying him, whereas they believe that they are making a fortune. I think the speech that he used is really, it's interesting. This is very typical of literature. It's denoting working class people by giving them working class speech. Well, it ought to be all right. So ought to, spelling phonetically, it's been boiling ever since 11:30, so missing the H off to show that sense of the fact that he is working class. And lots and lots of writers do this. I don't know if you've ever seen Poldark, for example, on TV. You have Ross Poldark, the landowner who walks around, and he's very much on the side of his workforce. But as soon as you meet one of the workers, instead of speaking in clipped tones like Ross Poldark, the worker and the working class people are always, oh, thank you, Mr. Poldark, for, and that, you know, they're using colloquial language. They're using idioms, local idioms, rather than speaking in the clipped terms of the landowner. What's very important is in this particular section here, where Bert reveals that the money he gets, he gives to Crass, the foreman, and Crass becomes very, very red. So what do the men do? They don't turn on Crass and say, hang on, what are you doing with our money? They still keep blaming Bert. Now, all of this shows that within the working classes, within the proletariat, there is this sense of hierarchy. Okay, so there is still this belief in this hierarchy, and what they do is they are still blaming this boy rather than blaming the foreman. And again, all it really does is show that fracture within the working class. The working class are not unified. Within, they are fractured. They are blaming each other. So as Marx would suggest that the working classes should unite to fight against the ruling classes, what Tressel is showing is how the working classes are fractured within. And poor old Bert speaks tearfully because he knows he has no power. Okay, he cannot fight against the others. Sawkins is important because Sawkins is kind of like the symbol of exploitation. We notice in this bit here, the others did not object to him trying to better his condition, but his wages were 2p an hour less than the standard rate. And the result was that in slack times, often the better workman was stood off when Sawkins was kept on. And it shows that there is, again, a fracture within the working classes, that they are willing to kind of undercut each other to keep within employment. And it kind of like links to that idea that Tressel argued with his employers, that he felt that you needed to pay for quality, and they were telling him that no, he needed to rush. He needed to rush. That idea that sometimes employers will they will employ someone who perhaps is not fully qualified because it means that they can exploit them further. They don't have to pay them as much, but obviously the end result is never quite as good. So he is kind of like symbolic of that exploitation. How did you get on yesterday? So we have the focus on the gambling system, and this is massively important because Bundy is reading the Daily Obscurer, and really what the Daily Obscurer is a newspaper. There's no such newspaper as a Daily Obscurer, but what the name suggests, the name itself, obscurity, suggests that the news that's being given is perhaps untrue. They are being fed untruths. Now, gambling is very important because gambleizers symbolizes the alienation of the working classes. What these people are more focused on is they cannot get wealthy through work, and this is the important thing. They want to be wealthy, they cannot get wealthy through work. So what they're trying to do is to get wealthy through a quick gain, which is through gambling. However, so gambling on horses and horse racing. This was a totally illegal activity. Horse racing, gambling on horse racing wasn't legalized in 1961, so it was a kind of like a covert thing, but it was allowed. It was not frowned upon so much. In a way, it was encouraged because what it did is it kept the proles entertained. They were more focused on trying to get themselves rich quickly than they were of being exploited by those above them. So what it does is it alienates them from the knowledge that they are being exploited in a way, and we know that they're being exploited because where is it? Oh yeah, the person who the kind of the tipster who suggests the horses is Captain Giddam. So Captain Giddam is saying, you know, put your money on these horses, but the name itself suggests that the tipster, Captain Giddam, is in a sense giving them the wrong tips. Okay, this is not somebody who's helping them get rich. It's helping the newspaper itself is a part of the system that keeps these people subjugated. So the whole idea of gambling is it shows how the proletariat are alienated themselves. Now, this whole bit here, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it focuses on Frank Owen, because Frank Owen is used as a mouthpiece by Tressel, and what he does is he points out the alienation and reification of the working classes, because Owen sees the exploitation, but obviously the alienation is successful because his fellow workmen see him as being mad. He has something wrong with his mind, so he's trying to better conditions for them, but they just think that he's mad because he's not joining in with the things like the gambling, which keep people alienated. So this 4 pages, we've got language that hints at either failings within capitalism or that wealth always exists. However, covert messages focus on that cyclical nature of servility and the divisions and the lack of unity within the proletariat. Poverty and illness are referred to, despite these being working men, people who should be earning enough. And further disparities alluded to with embedded capitalistic values within the proletariat workforce. So that whole idea that they adopt capitalistic values shows that disunity, that lack of unity. Proletariat society is fractured, and blame is a proportion due to lack of status rather than actual guilt. They blame Bert, not Crass. The Daily Obscurer is just an overt pun used to illustrate that the media is part of the superstructure keeping the proletariat subjugated. Faint hope is offered through gambling. However, this illustrates that the alienation of workers are ignorant to the exploitation, and Owen being used as a mouthpiece for Tressel to illustrate the alienation and reification, as Owen propounds socialist values against capitalist exploitation. Yet the alienation is successful as Owen's sanity is questioned. So this is what I'm very, very aware that I'm slightly running over time, but 30 seconds. What I want you to do, and this is going to be really for the next lesson, I'm going to ask you to look at a Keats poem of your choice. I'm not going to ask you to write an essay at all. I'm going to ask you to write a series of bullet points like this. So maybe focusing on, I think A Pot of Basil is a good one. I think La Belle Dame is a good one. How might you approach a Marxist reading within those poems? So kind of bullet point, what would you focus on? Which points would you focus on in those poems if you were giving a Marxist reading? Is there a covert message that you can link the poem to? And really that's just going to be like a little half-hour exercise, because I'm going to give you a little bit of reading for next week, and we're going to look at a picture book and look at post-colonialism. So I'm hoping that's kind of got you just a little bit more knowledge on what Marxism is and how you link it to a book. Apologizing that was like a million miles an hour, because I'm kind of fitting about 3 lessons into one due to the lack of time that we have. So if you've got any questions, you can ask them now. You can hang around, you can go away, you can do whatever you want really, because you are free. And we are all free. And apologies, I didn't link it to Bugs Life, but I will link it to Bugs Life at some point next year. Remind me.